Hi, I have often found that people on the internet, social media, or even in public argue that it is the men who are more perverted out of the two genders. But if you look at it very carefully, you will find that out of the two forces, masculinity and femininity, it is always the femininity, without exception, which is the perverted force. In fact, there is no exception to this rule. And the reason why people believe that it is the masculinity or men who are more perverted is because the definition of the word perverted is changed in order to prevent femininity from being exposed as the only perverted force out of the two. This will become far more believable if you understand that female rapists and female child molesters are actually treated with more kindness and empathy than the males who do these actions. And as an addendum to this point, you check this video and you will realize how this idea of linking femininity to pervertedness checks out. In fact, this video is about a woman who is hosting a 3-day belly dance retreat. And she, instead of just making it about belly dance, tries to argue how to shame people out of their own cultural practice. And therein, she does not give any reason why belly dance should not be treated as a shameful action. In fact, her point is the most bizarre out of many things that you see on the internet. She argues in defense of belly dance that the reason why belly dance has been deemed to be shameful is because it is called inappropriate for children to learn. It's a totally bizarre argument because, by that logic, everything or every cultural practice or any practice wherein we say that it is inappropriate for children to learn is an attempt to shame people out of that, which means that there is nothing inappropriate for children to learn. And that is the exact sentiment evoked by the comment section. In fact, if you look at the comment section, you will realize how perverted and degenerate the comment section is. And all of those arguments are typically, in fact, if you look at them, they are always more feminine in nature. Let us look at those comment section and you will realize how these women, you will be surprised why these women and this thinking is not termed as sexually predatory. Let us look at this one comment which will totally bring forth the point that I am trying to make. So Sid, the plant man, argues, saying it is inappropriate for kids to learn is just saying you find kids attractive, not gonna lie. And then he clarifies, I'm not saying I find the kids attractive. I'm not saying this kind of dance is inappropriate for kids to learn. I'm saying the opposite. This person is literally arguing that belly dance is appropriate for kids to learn. And the only reason why you will find it is inappropriate for kids to learn is because you find kids attractive. This is very bizarre because, by the logic of this comment, it means that anything that you believe is inappropriate for kids is because you find kids attractive. In fact, if at least it is sexual in nature, it means that kids could mimic any sexual behavior or behavior of the adults, because there's literally no person who will find kids engaging in that to be doing something inappropriate, because they will not attribute sexuality to kids. This totally misses the whole point. In fact, if there is something which is sexual or sensual and clearly it is practiced by adults, it is inappropriate for kids who are not sexual beings to mimic that. And therefore, such an action should be kept off the limits of children. There is no question of attraction there, because if you bring in attraction into this equation, it means that there is no action which you could call inappropriate for kids to learn, which can include really sexual stuff. Because let us say that if kids are engaging in something which is, even according to these people, sexual or sensual in nature, but why would they call it sexual or sensual? In fact, there's literally no reason to call that action sexual or sensual unless they themselves, by their own argument, find it sexually arousing or sensually attractive. Notice how this is not leading to a slippery slope. It is the slippery slope, but there is a reason why it is only being argued in the case of belly dancing, because of its feminine link, which is corroborated by another comment, Fancy Pants 12, who argues that it is not that these actions are problem, but because there are sick and perverted people in the world. Notice this is a standard argument that women use to justify their own sexual and perverted actions while blaming it on sick and perverted people. The argument goes like this, that there is something which is not sexual in nature, but it is deemed sexual by there are people who are sick and perverted. But this is the reason why you should not engage in it. Not because that thing is sexual or wrong or immoral, but because there are people who will take advantage of you doing that. In fact, she says she would be okay with her daughter learning how to dance like this, but she wouldn't be okay with it being posted online. But this is a very bizarre comment. If there are sick and perverted people in the world, they will sexualize children regardless of whether they are belly dancing or not. If belly dancing is not related to something sexual or sensual, it means that you should never be okay with posting the children videos or photos of your children online. And there is no linkage to belly dancing. In fact, the reason why she links it to belly dancing and the reason she links it to her daughter and not son is because belly dancing is a sexual and a sensual act which is only being called not sensual or sexual because women want to take the benefit of it in both the ways, both the sexual way and the non sexual way. And this is how all of the arguments go about in the West, wherein there's a class of sick and perverted people which is created to just justify the sexual action which the women do accept and deem as sexual themselves as okay. When in fact that proves that those women are the one who are sick and perverted. And those imaginary people who are being called sick and perverted, who might be sick and perverted or not, are very less sick and perverted in comparison to these women. In fact, there's another comment which is equally stupid, but which pokes holes in this thesis of Fancy Pants 12. So BNNUY Enjoyer says, your perspective is understandable, though on the other hand, predators will sexualize the children anyways, just like how they will assault women regardless of what they are wearing. Which is a totally bizarre argument because he goes on to say, personally, I think it's important to teach kids that their body isn't sexual unless being put in a sexual situation. But what is a sexual situation if indeed the whole idea is that something is not sexual and it is only sexual because it is deemed as sexual by the people? There's no such thing as a sexual situation. All situations are normal situations. In fact, any situation to be converted into a sexual situation has to involve a person sexualizing that situation, which means that BNNUY enjoyer is also sexualizing children. In fact, there's no way he can deem any action of kids or any situation in which the kids are in as sexual because unless he himself attributes sexuality to it, which is the funniest thing because he also argues that it would lead to less objectification. But that is exactly the point. The question is not about sexuality or not. The question is about objectification, which is exactly what the women argued. The point is, they want to enjoy the sexual things without being objectified by it unless they really want it. So this argument that you often see in the West, that they will assault women regardless of what they're wearing, is totally absurd because the whole point is about sexuality or sensuality. But it is very clear that women wear things which are sexual or sensual in nature, and deliberately so, at least some of the women, which means that they are the one who are the real perverts. And this whole segment about the predators is just being used to justify women doing certain sexual and sensual things, while people want to argue that they should not bear the consequences of doing something sexual or sensual. In fact, they should not be deemed as even doing something sexual or sensual unless they explicitly benefit out of it. And this is the funniest thing about all of this comment section. In fact, Minecraft boxes are runt says, I get what you mean. It's only inappropriate for kids to do because they'll find the moves attractive being performed by a child, which is hilarious because he gives the example of bra strap. But why would you want a kid to show the bra strap? It is not a sexual thing, but adults fetishize and try to rationalize it is so absurd. The reason being that bra is literally sexualized by women themselves, who often claim that they don't want sexualization. In fact, this is the reason why lingerie exists. This is the reason why sexually provocative lingerie exists. And if indeed it is wrong for adults to fetishize and rationalize it, then all adults are perverts. In fact, by this whole section of argument, it is the women who are sexual predators in all situations. Because if any woman is engaged in any sexual thought or any sexual action, she is attributing sexuality to it, which, and the action itself cannot be called sexual, or that person whom she is trying to sexualize cannot be termed as sexual, because by their own logic, sexuality is often attributed. In fact, it is not only often attributed, it is only put on a person by attribution, and there is no objective standard by which you can call something sexual. This is, of course, pointed out, this absurdity is pointed out by some comment sections, some people in the comment section. But the funniest thing is that this comment section goes even further, because there's some argument that totally breaks the wall in this situation. Said the plant man argues, but that is assuming children are sexual beings, which they are not. But this is the funniest thing. Who is a sexual being? Even adult men and women are only sexual beings in the sense that they can engage in sexual actions. But how is that a justification for sexualizing them? In fact, just because a person engages in a sexual action, that does not guarantee, or that does not justify them being sexualized, unless the thing that they are in, or the situation that they are in, or the action that they are performing is sexual by its very own nature. That means that sexuality, any attribution of sexuality, is sexually predatory, and it is not limited to children, which means all the norms that ever existed and are going to exist, except for those who are celibate or try to control their sexual thoughts in all situations, are sexually predatory, which means that everyone is a predator, which means that no one is actually a predator. In fact, all of this comment section is leading to a certain point, and that point is why women should not be given sexual freedom. The reason why women should not be given sexual freedom is because women want to maintain both this sexual freedom and this idea that they should be able to control the sexuality of other people. Not just being able to control the sexuality of the other people, but to call it non sexual. And that is the real perversion. It is not perversion to act sexual when you are subjected to a sexual stimulus. It is perversion to deem a thing which is not sexual to be sexual, which is something that you find femininity to be engaged in. In fact, this argument, the Veiled Muslimah 99 argues, a kid should be able to do anything and not be sexualized. This is the funniest comment, because this exposes all the above comments. If a kid should be able to do anything and not be sexualized, it means that there is really nothing inappropriate with anything that a child does, which literally means that there is nothing inappropriate at all. Because why would there be something inappropriate for a children, not inappropriate for a children to do, but would be inappropriate for a man or adult woman to do? She argues, a child's body is obviously neutral, and then she goes on, a normal person sees a child naked or fully clothed the same way, like it doesn't matter. But it means that all attribution of sexuality, even if this Muslima is attributing sexuality to an adult man, is in her own mind, because she is the one who is attributing sexuality to that person. In fact, by that logic, all women are necessarily sexual predators by their own argument. And they are not just sexual predators. In fact, they are, by their own argument, visual rapists, which is the least of the thing which is true. And this is the reason why women should not be given sexual freedom.